The silence in the house on Cypress Lane was a physical thing. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of a thick, woolen quiet that absorbed everything, even the frantic beating of a heart. Arthur and Moira had bought it for that very silence, a refuge from the city's relentless grind. They'd gotten it cheap. The real estate agent, a man with the pale, waxy complexion of a candle, had mentioned something about the previous owners leaving rather abruptly, but Arthur, a pragmatist by trade, saw only potential. Moira, a weaver of intricate tapestries, saw the beautiful, warped oak floors and the northern light in the master bedroom. The first oddity was the smell. It wasn't foul, not at first. It was the scent of old books and damp earth, a smell that seemed to emanate from the very walls. They bought air fresheners, then dehumidifiers, but the smell persisted, settling into their clothes, their hair, the threads of Moira's tapestries. Then came the whispers. They started at the edge of sleep, a susurrus so faint Moira thought it was the wind through the ancient, gnarled cypress tree that scraped against the guest room window. Arthur heard nothing. He'd pat her hand and murmur about an overactive imagination, but the circles under his eyes deepened. He'd begun waking up with a start, convinced someone had just called his name from another room. One Tuesday, Moira was in the basement, a place she hated. The single bare bulb cast a jaundiced light, and the silence there was the heaviest. She was searching for a specific skein of indigo wool when she saw it. A section of the stone foundation, behind a rotted shelf, looked wrong. The mortar was fresh, a stark gray contrast to the crumbling, ancient mortar around it, and it was laid in a perfect, foot-square patch. She called Arthur down. He, ever the rationalist, theorized a repair for a water leak, but his hands trembled as he fetched a chisel and hammer. The sound of metal striking stone was obscenely loud in the silent house. Chunk by chunk, the new mortar gave way. The smell hit them first, not just damp earth, but the sweet, cloying, meaty scent of something long since spoiled. Moira gagged, stepping back. Arthur, his face a mask of grim determination, pulled the last stone free. It wasn't a water leak. It was a small, hollow space, and inside, nestled in the dark, was a doll. It was handmade, its body a sack of faded calico, its hair a tangle of black yarn. But its face was not cloth or porcelain. It was a photograph, cut into a crude circle and sewn onto the fabric. A photograph of a little girl, her eyes wide and startlingly blue, her mouth a small, unsmiling O of surprise. The image was slightly wrinkled, giving the face a distorted, melted quality. Arthur reached in and pulled it out. It was cold, unnaturally so. As he held it, a single, perfect drop of dark liquid welled up from the seam where the photograph was attached to the cloth and fell onto his thumb. It was viscous and smelled of copper. God, he whispered, dropping the thing. It landed face up on the dirt floor, those blue paper eyes staring at the ceiling. They buried it. They chose a spot at the very back of the overgrown garden, under the weak light of a half-moon. Arthur dug a deep hole and Moira, using fireplace tongs, placed the doll inside. They covered it with soil, then with a large, flat stone for good measure. They went back inside, washed their hands raw, and drank 2 glasses of whiskey each, not speaking. That night the silence broke. It began with a sound from the garden, a dry, scraping sound, like a small, hard thing being dragged over stone. Scratch, scratch, scratch. They lay in bed, rigid, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. The sound grew louder, closer. It was on the patio now. Then it was at the back door. A faint pattering knock, like a tiny fist. Moira began to cry, silent, terrified tears. Arthur squeezed her hand. It's an animal, he breathed, his voice cracking. A raccoon. The knocking stopped. For a long moment there was only the sound of their ragged breathing. Then, they heard it from the foot of the bed. The soft, rustling sound of calico dragging across their warped oak floor. Something was in the room. With them, the air grew frigid. The smell of old earth and spoiled meat filled their nostrils. Moira squeezed her eyes shut, but Arthur, paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt like awe, forced his eyes open. He saw it then, in the sliver of moonlight cutting through the window. The doll. It stood upright by the bedroom door, its stitched body damp with grave soil. The photograph face was turned towards the bed, and it was no longer an expression of surprise. The paper had shifted, creased by some unseen force, into a wide Cheshire grin. The little blue eyes were crinkled at the corners with monstrous delight. It began to move. It didn't walk. It jerked, its limbs snapping into new positions with a series of soft, dry pops, like breaking twigs. Pop, shuffle, pop, shuffle. It was coming around the side of the bed, towards Moira. A sound came from it then, not a whisper, but a voice. It was the voice of a child, but filtered through something rotten and ancient, a sound like a recording played on broken equipment. Mommy, it rasped. You put me in the cold. I'm lonely. I want to play. Moira screamed, a raw, primal sound that shattered the last vestiges of the house's false silence. Arthur scrambled for the lamp, fumbling, knocking it over. In the darkness, the pop shuffle sound came faster, more frantic. The thing was climbing the bed sheets. He could feel the weight of it. On the mattress, he lashed out blindly, his hand connecting with something small and hard and impossibly cold. He heard a thud as it hit the floor. He grabbed Moira, and they fled, stumbling down the stairs and out the front door into the night, not stopping until they were huddled in their car, the engine screaming into life. They never went back. They sold the house to a developer for a pittance, never disclosing the reason. They moved across the country, to a small, nosy apartment where the sounds of traffic were a constant, blessed comfort. They never spoke of it again. Some horrors are too fragile. Giving them words gives them power. Months later, the demolition crew arrived at the house on Cypress Lane. The foreman, a burly man named Dead, gave the orders to start with the basement. The wrecking ball swung, reducing the ancient stone to rubble. During the lunch break, one of the younger workers, a kid named Leo, was poking through the debris. He bent down and picked something up from a pile of shattered stone and old mortar. "Hey Ed," he called out, holding up his find. "Check this out." "Weird, huh?" It was a doll. A homemade thing, made of calico and yarn. Its face was a photograph of a man and a woman, their features frozen in a scream, cut into a perfect circle and sewn onto the fabric. The image was slightly wrinkled, giving their faces a distorted, melted quality. Ed shrugged. "Trash. Throw it in the dumpster." Leo looked at it for a moment longer. It was strangely cold, and for a second, he thought he saw a single, dark drop of something well up from the seam near the photograph. He shook his head, chalked it up to the rain, and tossed it into the giant metal container with the rest of the rubble. That night, as Leo sat in his quiet apartment, he heard a sound, a dry, scraping sound, like something small and hard being dragged across the pavement outside. He told himself it was just the wind, but the sound was getting closer.